Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate between the true from the false. For them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change.
Thank you, Sheldon. All right, so if y'all are looking for that one feels, it's just a couple, it's like 8 sentences down.
Okay,
So I don't know if y'all caught that. It says basically this cycle is repeated over and over unless this person can have an entire psychic change. But then that key phrase was that one feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. So here's the deal. I'm going to give you my cycle so that, yes, you can learn a little bit about me, but more importantly, so that you can learn how to do your own cycle, right? This, right? Everything may be a little different, like the void may be a little different for some people than others. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. Like this void, some of you may be able to pinpoint back to a time in your life where something significant happened that kind of left you feeling kind of empty inside, be it a parent dying at a young age, or a creepy uncle kind of going in there and taking something from you that left you feeling this void. Me personally, I can't pinpoint anything specifically that left me feeling that. Just as far back as I can remember. Like I know I was raised by my mom's parents the first 5 years of my life, so I don't know what it was, but for whatever reason, I just from jump never felt like I even belonged, even with my own family, right? Growing up, I had a lot of friends, you know, none of them knew that I'd never really felt a part of, right? If you would have asked any of them, they would have been like, Sam's the life of the party, right? None of them knew that inside I just felt like I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin ever. Until the first time, and if you got a different flavor that you liked than what I liked, at this moment you just kind of plug in your flavor, right? But the first time I ever did a shot of heroin, I was like, oh wow, this is it, right? This is what I've been missing my whole life. This must be what the rest of the world feels like all the time. And it worked in the beginning, right? And what I mean by it worked is it worked to shut the voices off in my head. It worked to fill that big void inside of me. That big gaping hole felt all warm and fuzzy for the first time, right? And it worked right up until the point that it stopped working. Eventually it stopped working to shut the voices off. It stopped working to fill that void inside of me. And all I did at that point was just start mixing it up with other stuff. Cocaine and heroin, right? Speedballs, cocaine, heroin, meth, crack, you name it. I can honestly say, undoubtedly, I don't ever remember anybody offering me any type of drugs or alcohol and me saying, no, I'm good, right? Like whatever you got, I'll try it, I'll do it. Just whatever will give me a little more ease and a little more comfort for a little longer, right? And usually what it would look like for me, right, is I would come up with some master plan of what it is I need to do, right? Like all I need to do is just get all this shit out of my system and I'll be all right. And I'd go through horrible kicks, right? Like shitting and puking and shaking and hotting and colding for about a week, right? Get on the other side of that thing and be like, thank God that is over. I'm never going to touch that ever again, right? And I would start feeling that restless, irritable, discontent feeling all over again. But even if I started kind of rebuilding my life a little bit, like say I started getting a little job, there were times I'd get me a little job. I'd start doing good, like I really, got me a little place, and because I didn't really understand what it meant to be an alcoholic or an addict, I would think I'm doing good, right? I'm from New Orleans, and in New Orleans, daiquiris are pretty big, right? I'd start getting me a little job. I'd make friends with the normal people at my work. And, inevitably the night would come that, the people from my job would be like, hey, why don't you come out with us after work and get a daiquiri? Or here in San Antonio, a margarita. Like come out with the girls after work and have a drink. Man, I've been doing so good, right? Heck yeah, I'm gonna go out, right? And I would believe the lie that I'm like these normal people, because look how good I'm doing, right? And I would go out and I'd get that drink with them, right? And that's the tricky thing about this allergy, this phenomenon of craving, and we'll get to it in a second, right? And if you're a real one, the book tells us on that same page at the top, it says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Powder form, the rock form, the pill form, right? But I wouldn't know that, right? So I just, like I said, I'd go, and here's would be the tricky thing. Is like, right, I'd go out with everybody after work and I'd get that daiquiri and nothing happened. Nothing would happen. Because that allergy, if you're a real one, I know now that every time I put anything in my body, it's a roll of the dice, right? Like roll of the dice, just had a daiquiri, right? Next weekend comes, I'm gonna go out with the girls after work like I've been doing so good. Roll the dice. Just a daiquiri. But inevitably that night would come where that's my plan. When I left home, I only had an intention of going out and having a couple of drinks with the girls from work because I've been doing so good. No idea what it means to be an alcoholic or an addict, and no plan of burning it down to the ground one more time. But that night would come inevitably, right, where I'd go out to have that drink, and about midway through, I would set this off. And I had no idea that I even had this because I hadn't gotten the sponsor yet. I didn't know what that meant, right? And it wasn't until I got introduced to the program and got a sponsor, and my sponsor sat down with me and went over this out of the big book, Roman numeral 28, and she kept saying that allergy word, right? And I was just arrogant enough to go, all right, come on, give me a break. It's not a real fucking allergy, right? Come on, right? And she just kind of laughed. And she's like, well, what do you think allergy means? I was like, I don't know, like my throat's going to close. I'm going to get hives. I don't know. She's like, look up the word, right? And all it means is abnormal response to. That's all it means. And she said, and this is kind of one of the reasons why I know this book was kind of divinely inspired. Because back in 1939, they said phenomenon of craving. They used that language all the way back then, even though they didn't have the medical equipment that they have now. Because now they can clearly see. They've done studies. They've done studies where they wanted to see what fires different in the alcoholic addict brain versus the normie, right? They took these little hats with little wires on them, little electrodes, right? Like hooked it up to a monitor, and they wanted to see what fires different in the alcoholic addict brain versus the normie. And this is what they found, right? The studies kind of proved a couple of things. That there's no magic number of how long it is before a person develops the allergy. Some people, and maybe some of you here, from jump, right, come from a long lineage of alcoholics and were blackout drinkers right out the gate, right? Others, like me, right, there's like an imaginary line where, you know, there were times that I was, you know, I could have quit, I just didn't want to. And then all of a sudden I crossed this imaginary line where, oh crap, I want to quit. And I found I can't. Because I didn't know about this, right? And they wanted, so they can see very clear what happens in the brain when we trigger that phenomenon of craving, right? They see the limbic part of the brain fire up in the alcoholic addict, which never happens to the normal person. It's like, that's awesome. What the hell does the limbic part of the brain do? Well, the limbic part of the brain does have a God-given purpose, and the God-given purpose to the limbic part of the brain is this. Is this in charge of keeping me alive? It's in charge of regulating my body temperature, my pulse, making sure I get enough food, making sure I get enough water. When we're sleeping, the limbics is running the show. That's why if you're a real one, a lot of times waking up is truly a trigger because the limbics has been keeping everything regulated while we're sleeping, right? So just waking up, if you're a real one, can be a trigger, right? Whereas this never happens in the normal person, you know? And when my sponsor explained that to me, that my brain, right, and when the limbics is engaged, no other part of the brain actually works, meaning this. If I trigger that phenomenon of craving, it doesn't matter if my probation officer says, pee dirty one more time, you're going to prison. I'm not going to be able to the limbics is running the show. It's hijacked the rest of the brain. I can't even, it thinks, my brain thinks that whatever this substance is, that I need it just like oxygen. It's like me, at that point, it's like trying to not take a breath. It's not going to happen, right? I could no more not go pick up more at that moment than I could not take a breath, right? And when my sponsor dumbed it down for me like that, right? Like that my brain, that the limbics is going to take my brain and the rest of my body hostage, meaning if they say one more time, you're going to lose your kids, can't get there. The limbics won't even let me get that thought won't even be able to overrule the limbics, right? And when she dumbed it down for me like that, I was like, holy crap. Maybe it is an allergy. Maybe I do have this phenomenon of craving. Maybe I do trigger my limbics because I knew one thing, right? When it came between me and getting my next, it was ugly. It didn't matter who it was, right? Like I was going to do whatever, any means necessary. I would hurt my loved ones. I'd disregard anybody. None of that mattered. Like if you get in the way between me and my next when my limbics is engaged, it's going to be ugly. And I had no idea, right? Like, so here I go. I just went out with the girls after work to have a drink. And unbeknownst to me, I've triggered this phenomenon of craving. So here I am. I'm at the dope house before the night's out, right? Out there on a binger's spree, and because I do up, down, all around, right? I'm just going to go until either an outside force intervenes, like the police, or maybe a family member or a loved one comes and runs me off to detox or something, or until my body just, at some point, the body will pass out, right? And usually that's what would happen. I'd be out there on a binge spree until my body just couldn't stay up any longer, and I'd pass out. I'd come to emergent remorseful with, what the hell happened? You know, the book talks about it. You know, we might kind of spin to the normal people around us, even to ourselves, like what we think happened. But truth is that I had no idea. When I left, I had no intention of burning. I didn't want to screw up again, right? But I didn't know what it meant to be an alcoholic and an addict, right? So I'd come to emergent remorseful with whatever little loved ones still that were foolish enough to be sticking around, standing there going, what the hell happened? I thought you weren't going to do that shit anymore. Truth was, I didn't think I was going to do that shit anymore, right? And I'd look them all square in the eye one more time and go, well, you know what? It must have been because, and I'd come up, maybe because I was fighting with Susie at work. I mean, truth is I had no idea what happened. But I'd make that firm resolution to them all over again and say, you know what, but that's it. You know, I've truly learned my lesson this time. That will never happen ever again. And I'd be right back here with that void, restless, irritable, discontent feeling, right? Sober. This is me sober, right? This is me sober with no solution, right? They say, the book talks about the difference between the alcoholic and the hard drinker, that they look relatively the same. And given a sufficient reason, both of them can quit for a period of time, right? Externally, things get better for both of them. But if you're a real one like me, internally, I start getting batshit crazy, right? I start getting restless, irritable, discontent, right? So these are either going to be spiritual, physical, or mental. And because I don't want to say no to anybody, just kind of to yourself, looking at this cycle, right? Like if I was going to break, well, let's see. This right here, out of spiritual, physical, or mental, right? It took my sponsor finally telling me that I was spiritually maladjusted. That thing that my whole life, what the hell's wrong with me thing, right? And I'll be honest with you, and I think that it's normal that when we're broken that we try and come up with things that it can be. You know, I'm working with different sponsees, you know, they think, you know, growing up, I always thought that feeling was because growing up we were poor, or growing up I was overweight, or I had buck teeth, or I was underweight, or I was the only black kid, or I was the only white kid. Mine was, I know y'all gonna be surprised by this, I thought that only gay people felt that, right? Like that must be because that feeling, that's gotta be like a gay thing, right? And it wasn't until I was reading some of the short stories in the back of the book, because I couldn't sleep while I was sitting in a treatment center, right? Like I wasn't trying to read the first 164. I'm just staying, you know, the only book they let us have where I was the big book. And I was reading some of the stories in the back of the book, and this lady starts describing this internal condition so beautifully, you know, not feeling comfortable in her own skin and all. And I'm like, man, this is gonna be good. This lady's gonna be gay. And then all of a sudden she starts talking about her husband and kids, and I was like, wait, what? Straight people can feel that too. And I remember talking to my sponsor about it, and that's when I, finally got it. She goes, you don't know what that is? No, I've spent my whole life trying to figure out what that is. And she says, because I'm spiritually maladjusted, right? And I think it's normal, right? That when we're broken, that our head would start trying to fix us, right? Meaning that this is mental, right? Here again, out of these three, believing the lie, mental. When I actually pick something up, physically, right? I'm physically picking it up. And here's the kind of tricky one. It is a physical allergy that centers in the mind. And when I'm physically out there on a spree, when I come to, I'm emerging remorseful, all that's in my head, right? And when I make up my mind with the firm resolution, so if I'm going to break this cycle, right? Just kind of looking at where the whole problem begins is this, that I can't stand the way I feel sober, right? So just imagine for a moment, instead of feeling restless, irritable, and discontent, I was feeling at perfect ease and comfort in my own skin. Guess what's no longer screaming at me with, I know how to fix this, I know how to, like that shuts up. It stops the whole darn cycle. My head's not trying to fix me with solutions that no longer work, right? Because that's the deal. It's that even though the drugs and the alcohol hadn't worked in decades, right? I start feeling restless, irritable, discontent. My head will start trying to come up with a solution. I know how to fix this. This time I'm just gonna do alcohol, or this time I'm just gonna smoke weed, or this time I'm just, like when it starts playing out these little scenarios, my sponsor tells me that's just a red flag that I'm not spiritually fit. Me personally, I believe that alcoholics and addicts, that we are the chosen ones, and I'll tell you why. Because normal people will never have to get connected with their Creator, right? Like, my choices are get connected with my Creator, get locked up, die, or go permanently insane, right? They can go to work, come home, eat a little dinner, watch a little TV, go to sleep, wake up, go to work, come home, and they're content. They're perfectly satisfied with that. But then there's those of us that have a calling for something bigger, that's not going to be enough. That's why I think we're the chosen ones. Well, let's figure out how the hell do I get God in the God hole, right? Well, I'll tell you this. I was sitting in a treatment center just like this one back in 2008, and they would have people like us coming and bringing the meeting in over there. And at the end of the meeting, they would always ask somebody to close out the meeting with a promise. And this particular promise is called the Solution Promise, if you want to mark it in your book, and it's on page 25. It's the middle paragraph. And this is what these ladies were saying to me this particular night, right? They said, the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. Now here's the most profound thing I'd ever heard anybody say. They said the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us, which we could never do by ourselves, right? And the meeting let out, and I went over to the lady and I said, is that true? She said, is what true? And I was like, has your Creator entered into your heart? I had just never heard of that shit before, right? And she just kind of chuckled, and it was a treatment center, so the steps were hanging up, unlike this particular treatment center, right? And she pointed to the steps, and she said, what do you think those steps are for? And I said, I don't know, help me stop drinking and drugging. She kind of chuckled, and she pointed to step 12, and she said, read step 12 to me. And I said, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, she said, stop right there. She said, if you go into these steps seeking to connect with, right? If I go into these steps looking to connect with my Creator, that through the process of the steps, that I would connect. I'll tell you this, when I got here, I did not believe in a God. I didn't. I grew up ward of the state. It was run by a bunch of nuns, and religion had been shoved down my throat most of my life. I could not wait to age out of the system and get the hell out of there and never have to hear that G word ever again. I thought God was like Santa Claus, something you tell kids to make them behave. Eventually you get old enough, you know that shit's not real, right? But my sponsor pointed out that step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That I didn't have to come in believing, right? Did I believe she believed? Well, yeah, I believe you believe, right? Sure, right? There's a 3rd step prayer in this book on page 63. She said, I want you to start saying that 3rd step prayer every morning on your knees. I'm like, to who? She's like, it don't matter. You just start saying that 3rd step prayer every morning and you start seeking, right? And we'll talk more about that in a minute, right? And that's how my journey began. So tonight we're going to go over steps 1, 2, and 3, right? Okay. Yeah.